Today's workout consisted of 50 pull-ups and 100 push-ups and 100 squats. I just kind of separated the push-ups and the pull-ups by sets. So that would have been 10 sets of 5 with the pull-ups and 10 sets of 10 with the push-ups, and then my squats I did them how I usually do them, just 100 all the way straight. But I want to talk about this book I literally just finished reading today, 1984 by George Orwell. Maybe you've heard it, maybe you haven't. You might have heard of the author if you've went to school in the West. I don't know if they have, people read any of his books in school, but one book that they had us read when I was in high school, it was Animal Farm, by George Orwell. And you might have heard of the term Orwellian. That's kind of where it came from, where it's this dystopian world where kind of things went wrong. So 1984 was not written in 1984. It takes place in 1984, but it was written all the way in 1949. So it's almost 40 years prior to when the book would take place. And at the time, I guess when this book came out, 1984 would have depicted this dystopian place where there were three major ruling powers over the world, and they basically had rule over everybody, and that they were trying to either gain more power or gain power over other nations and countries and whatnot. There always seemed to be a never-ending conflict, and one way that the nations, or at least the nation that we follow, which is Oceania, which is where our main character Winston, where he lives and he presides, the nation is always trying to convince that the outside nations are a threat, that they're monsters, that they're inhuman, things like that. Not allowing them to learn the other languages, not allowing them to kind of travel outside of their own place and whatnot, because they want to instill this form of reality that seems it seems like every other person is disagreeable to their own kind or their own people. And one thing, so with our main character Winston, he works for what's called the party, or INGSOC, and they practically control everything, every bit of media. He works in the Ministry of Truth is what it's called, and it's practically the opposite of that. The whole point is that he kind of is sent a bunch of documents and media and newsletters and stuff like that, and he has to change them for them to fit within kind of the way the party wants to be viewed. So he's had to go back and write stuff saying that the party, they invented airplanes, that they invented helicopters, stuff like that, although all of this stuff was already around before the party took over. So in the book, Winston is a part of the generation that the party took over when they were very young, so around 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, right? So the party hadn't existed then, and he's basically going back. His job is to go back and rewrite history that he knows to be fact, and he has to make it false somehow. And then at some point, I guess spoilers for the book, since I already am talking about it, he kind of rebels against it, but things don't go really well for him. That's kind of all I'm gonna say. So it's just so interesting that in this world they also have where they try and control people's thoughts. I guess you can call them they call them thought crimes or thought polices, and or think polices, I think. And you can be charged for being a criminal based on your own thoughts, your own involuntary thoughts, and even your memories, if they can pick that up. And ways they can pick that up is that they have microphones everywhere, or most places, where people would be. And they also have what's called telescreens, which are basically just these screens with the microphones in them that can watch you. And whoever's in power can kind of tune in into what you're seeing and saying and doing. And any little slight change in movement or anything that looks suspicious, you can be locked up, and then you can be erased is kind of what they call it, right? To where it's like they kind of take your name and your evidence of existing out of history, out of existence. So it's like, you can exist one day, you commit a thought crime or whatever, and then now you're taken away, and then now your own friends don't even remember you. And the way the party is set up, they change things so crazy that they want so much control over anybody that they want to kind of get rid of like friendships and family. People who have kids in this world, at least people that are in the inner or the outer party, that are working for the party or are a part of the party. Their children are spies. Basically, they make their children into spies, and the children are encouraged to like snitch on their parents and tell on their parents if they were doing anything suspicious. So it's like just this weird dystopian world just full of control. And you can kind of find parallels and similarities to our world today, right? Where it is not okay for us to say or think or certain things, or to even believe in certain things, even though we know them to be fact, even though we know them to be just and righteous. We're even convinced that like our own involuntarily thoughts and emotions and feelings turned towards things are implicitly wrong, as if we're wrong for like immediately thinking or feeling a certain way, as if that has to be something that we have to drive out of our system, or that has to be something that we have to kind of unlearn, or whatever the case may be. When really these things are instinctual, right? These things are what is almost needed for human survival. And that's kind of like what's going on today, right? The same things, what I just described, those are the same things that's going on in the book, right? They want to get rid of love and friendships, and the reason why people would even get together and have children. And, they want to make everybody as autonomous as possible, as robotic as possible, basically, to where nobody can trust anyone, not even your own kin, not even your own quote unquote wife. They no one got married in this world. No one got married because they like actually love that person. They got married because they had to have kids to quote unquote serve the party, right? To do their duty to the party. And it took emotion and feelings from every action, of these characters, and that's what Winston would describe. And when he rebelled, he was basically taught a lesson, to just not trust anybody. He was, spoilers alert, I guess, tortured, bereaved, questioned. He committed to things that he didn't even do, and he like completely folded over like what could have been like months and months of torture. He didn't know how much time had passed, and he was he was been completely convinced that any feeling of rebellion that he had towards the party was completely wrong, and that he had to drive that out of his system. Even the rebellion, quote unquote, which is called like the Brotherhood, was made up by the party to lure in people who had any type of disobedience in them, so then that way they can be punished, they can be brainwashed, and they can be they can think differently as to the ways that they thought before, and be convinced otherwise. So I think it's just a very, very interesting book that I just read here. I got it some months ago. I definitely could have finished it earlier, but I wasn't really super consistent with reading it. As of the past like month or so, I've been really consistent in reading it, and I was able to get through all of the book that I had left. It's a pretty good read. It's a great read. It's very interesting to follow the characters. I guess the main character. There isn't a good ending. It's not about all happy flowers and roses. What's interesting though is kind of like you seem like it is a good ending in the eyes of the character of Winston. It seems like a good ending. Because he's blissful and sorrowful of like his misdeeds to the party and whatnot, and but really it's a bad ending. What we see at the end is a broken, tortured man who basically has no balls, or no single thought for himself, nothing like that. He's completely convinced of, the lies that are present. He's convinced that those are truth, even though maybe even all the way deep down he doesn't believe in that. And this power at B that basically gives just enough to sustain its people, but takes away enough to where they have to depend on them. It makes them like these brainless, mindless zombies who will like forever be controlled. And that's kind of how the story ends. That's how that's what the main character becomes. But it's kind of propped up as like this nice and joyful thing almost, which is truly sad. But yeah, I guess that's kind of like a book review. I guess I just did a book review. Yeah, if you guys want to check out the book, you should check it out. It's definitely a very interesting read. But yeah, peace out. I hope you enjoyed this video.